Hello, welcome to RC Video Reviews. In today's video, we've got a really exciting topic to cover, and that's ExpressLRS. Recently, Happymodel released an ES915TX and RX combo that you can buy retail from places like GetFPV. The cool thing about this is that the ExpressLRS platform is a long-range receiver platform capable of supporting Crossfire protocol and telemetry, and it's priced right at only $59 for the transmitter and one receiver and two T antennas. After that, the receivers are only about 20 bucks. Today I'm going to show you how to set up the ExpressLRS 915RX and TX combo, including a firmware upgrade, bind, BetaFlight setup, and the radio setup. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Before I go any further, I'm going to warn you this is not for the faint of heart. If you're not willing to tinker a little bit and reap the benefits of an open source long-range platform using LoRa that you get with ExpressLRS, then just stick with an off-the-shelf model like Crossfire and you're good to go. If you are willing to tinker a little bit, you'll be able to take advantage of a lower cost hardware platform and an open source software platform, which is really important given some of the shenanigans by big companies out there these days. Let's get started by talking about the game plan for this video. The first thing we'll do is take a look at the Happymodel ExpressLRS system. That's the ES915TX and RX combo available on GetFPV and probably some other retailers. I got mine at GetFPV. The second thing we'll do is I'll show you how to install the Configurator. This is the tool that will let you set your build options and compile the firmware for your receiver and your transmitter. Don't worry. They've really simplified the process, so don't let that scare you off. It's not as hard as it sounds. The next thing we'll do is install the CRSFShot firmware on our OpenTx radio. This step technically is optional, but if you want to take full advantage of what the ExpressLRS system has to offer, I recommend going ahead and installing this firmware. After that, we'll add the ELRS LUA script to our SD card so we can do things like bind the transmitter to the receiver. Next, we'll install BetaFlight. We're going to skim over this one, but I want to make sure you understand that this is meant for connection to a BetaFlight flight computer. After we install BetaFlight, I'll show you how to bind your receiver to your transmitter, and then I'll show you the changes you need to make in your BetaFlight configuration in order to work with the ExpressLRS ES915 receiver. Next up, we'll build the firmware for the receiver and transmitter and install the firmware on the receiver and transmitter. Finally, we'll go through the radio setup and I'll show you how to use the ExpressLRS LUA script. Hey guys, during edit, I realized that I wouldn't be able to do this in as few steps as I thought. I thought the TBS OpenTx firmware would also be able to flash the ExpressLRS firmware onto the transmitter module, and it turns out that's not the case. So there's an interim step which requires us to install an OpenTx nightly firmware on the radio in order to flash the ExpressLRS firmware to the transmitter. And then after that, we have to install the CRSFShot firmware in order to get access to CRSFShot. So the process goes, we install an OpenTx nightly, we flash the transmitter firmware, then we install a TBS CRSFShot firmware to gain access to CRSFShot. You don't need to worry about capturing any of the links that I'll use in this video. All of them will be in the description for your use later on. First, let's take a look at the Happymodel ES915TX and RX combo. This is the setup I found on GetFPV. As you can see at the time of the video, this is $59.99, and that includes the transmitter, a receiver, and two antennas. One thing you'll notice that's missing is what's called a project box, or a box to install this on the back of your radio. You will need to get one of those on your own, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The next thing I wanted to show you, and why this is such an important development in the RC community, is because here's the list price on the receivers, $21.99. You have to understand this ExpressLRS LoRa technology has been proven out to 40 kilometers with a power level as low as 10 milliwatts, and it supports up to 2 watts. So imagine that. It also supports advanced telemetry from BetaFlight, including sensors like attitude, GPS, ground speed, that type of thing. All those advanced sensors that you get with a typical Crossfire setup, you also get those on ExpressLRS. The next thing you'll need is a project box, and the reason for that is this is what the transmitter gets mounted in so it can connect to the back of your radio. You can buy this from Radio Master right now. There are a couple other retailers out there, but as of this video, a lot of them are out of stock. If you can't get a hold of one of these, another option is to print one, and Happymodel does provide a free STL file. Link will be in the description. You can download this and print it. That's what I did with mine, and it works just fine. In fact, if you look at the video on the bottom, there's a look at my project box that I printed. All right, now you've had a quick look at the ExpressLRS ES915TX and RX combo by Happymodel. Let's get on to the software. Hey, if you like the work I do here on RC Video Reviews, please consider joining me on Patreon. For about the price of a cup of coffee, you can help me keep making videos just like this one. If you'd like to help out, there's a link in the description and on your screen. The first piece of software you need is what's called the ExpressLRS Configurator. Now you might want to ask me, hey John, why are we bothering to install firmware on the receiver and transmitter? Doesn't the Happymodel come with ExpressLRS already installed? The answer to that is yes, it does. However, it doesn't quite work the way you want it to. When I first got mine bound and connected, I had issues like telemetry dropouts. I didn't see CRSFShot working. I saw a disagreement between the LUA script and the firmware in the radio. So the bottom line here is that this platform is rapidly developing, so you may as well embrace the idea of flashing firmware on your receiver and transmitter as new features come out. We'll start out by using the ExpressLRS configurator. What you need to do is just find the one that works for your platform. In my case, I'm running Windows, so I need the ExpressLRS configurator setup EXE. So I'll click on that one and download it. After you've downloaded the ExpressLRS configurator, go ahead and install it and run it, and you'll be brought into this build environment. Now, again, don't let it freak you out. It's not that hard to navigate in here. Under firmware version, go ahead and stick with official releases and select the latest one. As of the video, the latest one for me is 1.00 release candidate 2. So that's the one I want to use. It's the latest release available. The next thing we need to do is figure out our target. In the case of Happymodel, it's really nice. They've done a good job organizing things. Just scroll down until you see the Happymodel. This is 2.4 gigahertz. We're looking for the 915 version. So there are two things that we need to configure: the RX and the TX. Up first, we're going to go ahead and do the RX, and make sure you select the one that says BetaFlight Pass-Through. You might read some different things on the internet saying you have to flash first. Don't worry about it. This hardware already has ExpressLRS flashed on it, so that means the BetaFlight Pass-Through works right out of the box. So select that one, and then under device options, take a look at what I've got and copy that. The only thing you might want to change is your binding phrase. I just used something real simple for an example. The thing I need to point out about the binding phrase is it needs to be the same on the receiver and the transmitter. I'll let you go ahead and read through all these different comments about what these performance options include, but for me, I want lock on first connection, hybrid switches, and telemetry. For binding phrase, I chose 1234 ABCD, and regulatory domain for me is FCC at 915 megahertz. If you live in the EU, you want 868. If you live in Australia, you pick the AU 915. With these options selected, you might be tempted to hit build and flash, but don't do it. Just hit build. And after you hit build, we're going to walk away. Just minimize the software, let it do its thing. It's going to do all kinds of setup stuff. It's going to install software and set up virtual machines. Don't worry about it. Just minimize it. Let it do its thing. Just minimize it and leave it alone. In order to flash ExpressLRS firmware, you have to install an OpenTx 2.3 nightly. So the link will be in the description. Scroll down to the bottom and download the OpenTx Nightly 2.3 companion Windows installer. And let's just take the latest version, so N488. After you've installed Companion, hit the download button and hit download firmware. It'll give you an option for the latest Nightly 2.3.11. We'll go ahead and save that to our ExpressLRS TX folder and hit save. With that complete, we'll boot the radio up in bootloader mode, so press T4 and T1 in and press the power button. And once you see a light, that puts us in bootloader mode. Go ahead and connect your USB cable. Click on the right firmware button and then find that firmware you just downloaded. In my case, it's OpenTx, no heli. That's the one I want. And we'll hit write to TX. Okay, when Companion's done writing the firmware, you can click the close button and then close out a Companion, remove the USB cable, and then hit exit. The next thing we need to do is add the ExpressLRS LUA script to our SD card. Here's how we'll do that. We'll connect our SD cable to the top of the radio. We'll have an option for joystick or storage. We'll click on storage. And then we'll go to the link that I have in the description for the Lua script. Simply left click in this window and then hit Control A on your keyboard. That selects all text. Right click and hit copy. And then on your desktop, open up Notepad and paste the contents that we just copied into Notepad. We'll click File, Save As, navigate to our SD card on our radio, go to the Scripts folder, and then Tools, and just type in ELRS LUA. Make sure the save as type is not set to text. Make sure it's on all, and then hit save. And when you do that, just verify in your scripts folder in tools that you see ELRS LUA. It cannot say .txt on the end. If it does, it will not work. It has to say .lua on the end. The next step is to install the BetaFlight Configurator. Just go to the link in the description, scroll down until you find the platform that you're working on. In my case, it's Windows, so I'll click on the win32.exe and I'll download it. When that's complete, I'll run the configuration setup and that will get BetaFlight installed on my computer. Now it's time to bind the receiver to the transmitter. Before you do that, you have to assemble your project box. It's real simple to do it. Just put the transmitter in the box. There's 2 screws. Screw those down to hold it inside the box. Connect the antenna to the board. Run the SMA pigtail out the top. Connect your T antenna, and then put the module inside the module bay on your radio. On the front side of the radio, you need to press Model and scroll left until you get to internal and external RF. Make sure the internal RF is turned off and set your external RF to CRSF. Don't be confused. This is not a Crossfire module, but the radio uses the Crossfire protocol to talk to the transmitter. So all you have to do is press on the jog dial and go until you see Crossfire. Once you see that, you'll hear some tones that let you know that the transmitter is working okay, and leave it on channel range 1 through 16. That's all you've got to do. With that done, we're going to go ahead and hit return and then press the system button. On your tools page, scroll down to your ExpressLRS LUA script that we installed a couple steps back, and then just press the jog dial once. And you should see it connect pretty quick. In my case, I've got a packet rate of 200 Hertz, a telemetry ratio of 1:8, a power setting of 50 milliwatts, and an RF frequency of 915. So you can make changes to these if you want. One thing I'll get into later is what these numbers mean up on the top. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So if you want to change a value like the power output, you can change it from 50 milliwatts to say 10, and then just click on it and there you go. You're down to 10 milliwatts. The RF frequency is not changeable. You have to do that in the firmware, so it's not clickable. And then you'll notice the last option down here is bind. We'll be getting to that in just a moment. All right, notice the bind procedure for the RX says supply power to the receiver, wait until the red and green LEDs on the receiver are off, immediately turn off power, and then repeat the steps above. When the receiver is powered on for the 3rd time, the red LED starts to flash quickly, which means the RX is in binding mode. It's going to be impossible for me to share that with you because I've got my receiver already in the quad and bound. But what I can tell you is that if you follow those steps exactly, it will work. You have to apply power, and as soon as the red and green LED goes off, turn the power off, and then turn the power back on again. As soon as the red and green LEDs go off, turn the power off, and then turn the power back on again. On the 3rd time, that red LED will start to flash very quickly. At that point, you come over to your transmitter, go down to bind and press the button. Red and green go solid, you have a bind. On your screen, you'll notice I've got an image of the ES915 receiver. It's very simple to connect these to BetaFlight. The VCC line, which is this one, that's your positive line. You connect that to your plus 5-volt pad on your BetaFlight controller. This second one is the ground line. We connect that to the negative line on our BetaFlight controller. And then the last 2 terminals are receive and TX. The TX line gets connected to the RX line on BetaFlight. So that goes to R. And then the RX line goes to the TX UART on BetaFlight. That one's T. All you have to do is connect the TX port on the receiver to the RX port on your flight computer, and connect the RX port on your receiver to the TX port on your flight computer. The next thing we'll do is set up BetaFlight. So connect your flight controller to your desktop computer. by plugging it in. And then in BetaFlight, mine's already set to connect. The first thing we need to do is turn on Serial RX for the UART pad you connected your receiver to. In my case, I connected my receiver to UART pad 5. So I'll turn that on under Serial RX. The next thing to do is click on the Configuration tab, and we'll scroll down until we see the receiver section. Leave the receiver mode alone under serial-based receiver, but change the provider from whatever you had it on before to Crossfire. Again, it's not Crossfire, but this is the protocol that's used between the receiver and the flight controller. It uses the Crossfire protocol. The other thing you'll want to do is go ahead and turn on Telemetry, because you will be able to get advanced telemetry when we're done. Finally, hit save and reboot, and when the flight computer comes back on, go under the receiver tab and make sure you have control with your radio. So you can see my roll is working, my pitch is working, yaw is working, and throttle is working. So there we go. Now we definitely have communications between the transmitter and the quad and BetaFlight. After we verified our receiver works, next thing we need to do is disconnect and go ahead and close BetaFlight. We don't need to use BetaFlight for the next step. You should remember several steps ago we had the ExpressLRS configurator open, and I told you to go ahead and do a build, but not a build in Flash. The reason we did that is because it takes the configurator a little bit of time to set up the developer environment, and I didn't want you to get too hung up watching what was going on there and worrying about it. So it does take some time, but at the end, what you should notice is that you should see this little green box that says success and that your firmware has been built. Okay, now it's time to flash our receiver firmware to the receiver. We're going to click on Build and Flash this time. Don't make any changes to these settings. They're fine the way they are. Just hit Build and Flash. Now, if you have any problems connecting, here's what I advise you to do. Open BetaFlight up, connect BetaFlight, make sure you can look around in BetaFlight and do things you normally do in BetaFlight, and then just hit the disconnect button and don't do anything else. What that'll do is help set the COM port to the right COM speed. I've seen some errors in a couple of attempts at this, but by opening BetaFlight and connecting and disconnecting, it seems to square things away. Just make sure BetaFlight is disconnected, because that COM port has to be free for the ExpressLRS configurator to communicate through BetaFlight to the receiver. All right, so we'll hit Build and Flash, and you'll watch it scroll by, and it'll all happen real quick. Now that we're in flashing device, we should see some log entries, and you can just use your mouse to scroll down and kind of follow the log a little bit, and you'll see things start to happen here. I got into bootloader after one attempt. That's a good sign. Waiting for sync, and there we go. We're uploading our firmware. There we go. Result equals success. So that's it. We've now flashed our firmware onto the receiver. So that's a big step out of the way. And now you can flash firmware to your receiver anytime you need to. You've already done all the hard work. From here on out, if you ever want to make any changes, you just come under official releases, find out what they've got, pick the one you want, hit build and flash. Real simple. Once you've done it once, it's real easy after that. Okay, the next thing we need to do is build the firmware for the transmitter. Notice this device target says Happymodel RX. We're going to change that now to be Happymodel TX, and we're going to use the stock bootloader. So Happymodel TX ES915TX via stock bootloader. Again, don't make any changes. Leave all this stuff alone and make sure your custom binding phrase is the same. If they're not the same, you're not going to be able to bind. So these have to be the same. When it comes to performance options, I did the reading. These are the ones that make the most sense for me. If you have a different environment, pick the one that makes the most sense for you. Now with the transmitter, we just want to hit build. We're not going to try and build in Flash. We're just going to hit build. So click on the build button, and what will happen is the ExpressLRS configurator is going to build your firmware, and then it's going to show you where it put that firmware in your computer. Okay, you see what happened there? It popped up a window showing me the ELRS firmware, and it's right here. It's the firmware.ELRS. That's the one you want. Now, the instructions mention something about an R9 FRK file. You don't need to worry about that. They say you use the same exact process as you do with an R9 module. The one big difference is that we've already got ExpressLRS on our transmitter, so we don't need to worry about the FreeSky module. This is the only one you need. So right-click on the firmware ELRS and hit copy, and then go back to your desktop, find that little folder that you've been saving things into, and right click and hit paste. I'm going to replace this because I've already done it. So I'll replace that one. That's my new firmware. This R9M ELRS underscore BLFRK, you don't need that file. You can ignore that. I've got the quad unplugged because I don't want any confusion about what it is we're flashing. I've already backed out of the Lua script. I'm back on my main model screen, and now I'm going to connect my USB cable to the top of the radio, and I'll be prompted for joystick or storage. We're going to hit storage, and that'll pop up a window on the computer screen. On my SD card on my radio, just to keep things organized, I'm going to create a folder called ELRS. And then I'm going to drag my firmware that we just created into that ELRS folder on my SD card. And once that's done, we'll just verify it's in there. And now we're good to disconnect the radio from the computer. So we'll disconnect, and now it's time to flash the transmitter. Click on System, navigate to the SD card, click on Firmware, ELRS folder, and then let's flash our firmware ELRS by long pressing the jog dial and hit Flash External ELRS. You'll get a device reset, and then it should write right across the screen. There we go, writing. When that's complete, you'll hear a tone come out of the transmitter. There we go, we got our tone. Okay, the next step is completely optional, but if you want to take advantage of TBS CrossFireShot, you need to install a TBS firmware. Let me explain why. On the ExpressLRS LUA script, you can see I've got a packet rate of 200 Hertz, and this number at the top, 0:250, that means bad packets and good packets per second. Notice how my packet rate is 200 Hertz, but I'm getting 250 good packets per second. These numbers should match. If they don't match, you don't have CrossFireShot working properly. So if I click on this packet rate and lower it to 100, we should see that good packet rate also drop to 100, and it's not doing that. So the nightly doesn't support CrossFireShot. In order to get CrossFireShot working, you have to go to the link I'll have in the description for the TBS OpenTx firmware. We're going to download that and flash it with Companion. Here's a page with a link to the CrossFireShot OpenTx firmware that you'll need to install if you want to take advantage of CrossFireShot. There's a link on this page that says Nightly Firmware. If you click on that, you'll get a nightly zip file that has the firmware inside of it. We'll open that zip file and search for the firmware you want. In my case, I have a TX16S, so I'll right-click on that and hit Copy. And then I'll find my folder on the desktop, my ELRS folder. I'll open that, and I'll paste that firmware right in there. And of course, I'm going to replace it because I've already done this. The next thing we need to do is turn the radio off, start it in bootloader mode by putting T4 and T1 inboard and turning on the power switch, connect the USB cable, run Companion, and then select Write Firmware to Radio. Now we've got to browse to the location where we saved our firmware. In my case is TBS Firm TX16S. We'll select that and we'll hit Write to TX. When the close button is available, click it. You can now close Companion. We're done with that. And we'll hit exit. That'll force the radio to reboot. Okay, with the radio rebooted, let's press the system button, scroll down to our ELRS LUA script, press the jog dial, and notice my packet rate is 200 Hertz and my good packets are 200 packets per second. If I click the jog dial and change this to 100 Hertz, we'll see the good packet value also drop down to 100 packets per second. That's the indicator that CrossFireShot is working. We've got our bind, we've got CrossFireShot working, all of our firmware is updated. Let's do the last little bit for BetaFlight. We'll connect our USB cable to the BetaFlight flight controller, and then we'll go over to our model settings and look for telemetry values. I'm going to delete all of mine. I'll delete all my sensors, and then we'll just discover new sensors. When we do that, you should see a whole list of sensors populate. 2 different RSS values, a receiver quality, receiver signal to noise ratio. There's ANT0, I'm not sure what that one is. There's RF mode, transmission power, TRSS, TQLY, GPS data, ground speed, heading, altitude, satellites, receiver battery. We got the whole deal. Pitch, roll, and yaw. And by the way, if you're curious about this, you can change the update rates for telemetry in the script. If your telemetry values aren't coming in fast enough, you want to lower this number. So right now I've got mine set at 1 to 8. If they're coming in just fine, I can try raising that. That'll save bandwidth for control. One way you can check that is by running a script like the INAV LUA script. So we'll do that real quick. We'll go to scripts, telemetry, and I'll run INAV LUA. And then as I move the quad around, you should be able to see the indicator, the artificial horizon moving. But see, that's not moving quite as fast as I'm moving the quad. So you might want that telemetry to come in a little bit faster. So if your telemetry is not coming in fast enough, change your TLM ratio. If you have the ratio set at 1 to 16, you get 167 bits per second. If you change it to 1 to 8, you get 417 bits per second. So we'll hit return on that and we'll fire up that Lua script again. Scripts, telemetry, INAV LUA, execute. And now when I move the quad around, we're getting updates just a little bit faster. One thing I noticed during the filming of this video is the TBS OpenTx firmware does not flash Express firmware correctly to the module. So in order to flash it, you have to go back to an OpenTx nightly, flash your firmware, and then put your TBS nightly back on top. That's a little unfortunate, but that's the way things are right now. I was not able to successfully flash ExpressLRS firmware to my transmit module using the TBS OpenTx firmware. Hopefully they get together on that pretty soon and make that a little bit easier, because until they do, you've got to go back and forth between OpenTx in order to flash your module. There are other ways to flash the transmitter, including using an SDK adapter, but that's for another day. All right, guys, you now know how to install, bind, configure BetaFlight, and flash firmware on both the receiver and the transmitter for ExpressLRS. I told you this was a long video. I hope you stuck through to the end, and if you like this kind of content, I'd really appreciate that subscription and hit the notification bell so you know when new material hits the channel. That's all I've got for today. Take it easy.